Good evening, everybody. We probably should get started. I have a couple little housekeeping kinds of things for the candidates and for the audience. If you could turn off your cell phones, it'd be really, really helpful. The other thing is, unfortunately, we're having to share a mic up here for all of you, which is kind of a pain. But with the microphone, I mean, I'm going to be rotating around, but you'll always just be passing it to the next person usually. So, it's pretty easy that way. When you're using the microphone, don't put it right up to your mouth. I was told about about hands away. Marlene, this way. Yeah, more like that. So that apparently if you put it up too close, it's not good. So keep that in mind. And I think that was, so if you have it far away and we'll be kind of handing it down, the only time it's going to be an issue is you'll have to kind of hand it down quickly when I go from Charles to Marlene. That'll be they'll toss it, right? Yeah. No, I don't think that'll work too well. Okay, so let's actually get started here now. Welcome. My name's Mary Ellen Barnes with the League of Women Voters of Palos Verdes Peninsula. I'd like to welcome all of you to our candidates forum for the Palos Verdes Estates Homes Association. The League is hosting this forum tonight. We are a nonpartisan organization, neither supporting nor endorsing candidates at any level of government. Now, I want to go over the format for everybody, but mainly for our candidates so that you know. We're taking written questions tonight, and we've got a ton of them up here. So if for some reason your question doesn't get asked, your specific question, it's probably because we ran out of time. We have a ton of questions here. Also, Nancy is kind of sorting through them, so if we get a whole bunch that are really similar, we'll probably just ask one or two, not the same one over and over and over again. If you need to write, we're taking written questions, so we have a couple people here who are handing out cards and little pencils. So if you need one, just kind of raise your hand and somebody will bring you one and then they'll pick it up also. Let's see. So Nancy's kind of sorting through them. She's not editing them. She is not censoring them. She's not throwing out questions that she doesn't like. It's people come up to me afterwards and they're always like, "You didn't ask my question. Didn't you like it?" And I'm like, "No, it's nothing to do with that." All of our candidates tonight have signed our agreement to abide by our rules, and I know all of you will. Just to remind you, you have 2 minutes each for your openings. You have up to 1.5 minutes for each of your answers. And then you have 2 minutes for the closing. We have 2 ladies down here in front. Wave your little. They are going to be kind of keeping track. They're going to be timing, and they're going to give you, like with the openings and closings, they're going to give you the little 1 minute and then a 30-second, and then they have a stop sign. And if you are like right in the middle of a sentence, you can finish. I'm not cutting you off mid-sentence. But don't like take advantage and keep going and going and going, because then I will cut you off. And you don't want that. You're on tape here. We are not doing rebuttals of other people's answers, so just kind of go with your answer. And let's see, what else? This is a nonpartisan forum, so we don't want lots of people cheering for their favorite candidate or booing or being, anything like that. This is for people to make up their mind and to listen and we're all adults and polite here, so let's be adults about this. Okay, I would like to introduce our candidates. We have, starting here, we have Marlene Breen, Gain Brenneman, Dick Fay, John Harbison, Reed Schott, and Charles Tang. Obviously, they're sitting in alphabetical order. That's how we set it up tonight. So we're going to be starting with our opening statements with Marlene and working our way down to Charles Tang. And when we do closing statements, it's going to go the opposite direction. So, Marlene, you've got 2 minutes.
Hello?
There should be a button on the mic.
Hello? There we go.
Yes, it's working.
All right. I'm Marlene Breen. I've lived in PV. Closer, yeah. Closer. Hello? Is that better? No. Hello?
There, it's on.
Woo! Okay.
Yeah, now it's on.
Hi, I'm Marlene Breen, and I've lived in PVE for 35 years, raised my family here. My husband lived in the area previously, and I'm really excited to be working in the art jury in the Homes Association. I was appointed in February of this last year, and I think we've been making some good strides and some improvements. There's a long way to go, but it's pretty exciting. My education, my degree's in environmental design, which means I'm familiar with a lot of the responsibilities that we have in the Homes Association. I've done special studies on Olmsted, and I've worked at a lot of different scales. So I've done work in urban planning, I've done architecture. Currently I do a lot of landscape design in the area, so we've been very concerned with trees and views and maintaining our green spaces. And I'm really into the history of our city, and I feel that the Homes Association is more than the art jury. I think we're also a repository for the history of our city, and I think that we have a responsibility to help guide the future and to determine what our city is going to look like in the next 10, 20, 50 years. So thank you.
Thank you. Gain.
Hi, I'm Gain Brenneman, and I want to thank everybody for coming out on this cold night, and I would particularly thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this and organizing it. I'm very appreciative of that. I'm seeking your vote to vote for me because I feel like I can bring my experience and tenacity and energy to solving some of the problems that we face at the PVHA board. I came here 20 years ago. I've raised my family. My kids went to the schools here. We loved it. And I now find myself a semi-retired physician and really want to contribute and give back to the community. I think that we have at least 3 major problems facing the current PVHA association. I've been a president of an HOA out of state for almost 27 years. I'm very familiar with balancing a budget and facing a lot of those problems, so I feel that that can really bring a lot of value to the table here. I think if you would all remember 10 or 20 years ago driving through this community, you had wide open ocean vistas and mountains and canyons and could see everything, and now it feels very closed in. I really feel that we've blocked a lot of views driving around the homes and looking for those views. And one of the things that has brought me to this table here is view restoration. I think we should go back to the 1923 CC&Rs and enforce those views on page 1, number 1. So I'd like to ask for your support to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dick.
Hello?
Should be on.
When I first moved into PVE, which was in the early 70s, the realtor told me that the parkland was important, the PVHA was important, and the PVHA would protect the parkland. I believed her. I was dismayed when I learned that the PVHA had been party to a transfer of parkland to a private citizen as part of a deal that received very little publicity. I then got involved and attended planning commission meetings, PVE city council meetings, and PVHA board meetings. I also joined the committee to enforce parkland covenants and supported the efforts to undo the transfer. During this time, I found the performance of the PVA board to be embarrassing and felt I could do better. I ran for the board in elections that never achieved a quorum. I was appointed to the board early this year, and I think we have made progress on some fronts, including communications, but we have a long way to go. We have used the website to put up newsworthy items and proposed resolutions. We've started an email blast system. It only has a few users, but you can easily sign up at pvha.org if you want to be kept abreast. In my opinion, this year we made a major mistake when we adopted Resolution 185, which governs tree view disputes and limits the disputes to adjoining properties. I was very much opposed, and while Marlene and I voted no, it still passed 3-2. Since then, much of our meeting time has been spent hearing from members as to what is wrong with 185. Marlene has been working hard on a better view resolution, but it is not an easy task. I would like to continue on the board. I want to continue to improve our communication efforts. And if anyone knows a web designer,
Oh, okay. Thank you. John.
Thank you, Dick. I'm John Harbison, and thank you all who came tonight, and thanks to the League of Women's Voters for hosting the forum. We desperately need a more engaged electorate, so you should be proud that you're here. Since failure to reach a quorum in the past 10 years has led to no valid election in the last decade, and in fact, haven't met the 50% quorum requirement only 3 times in 25 years. I'd be honored to serve on the PVHA board. In the recent Panorama Parklands litigation, I fought for the protection of our CC&Rs, which is integral to the stewardship responsibilities of the PVHA board. Now that the lawsuit is successfully settled and our parklands are secure, I look forward to the potential opportunity to work together and channel my deep understanding of the deed restrictions and bylaws into protecting and implementing the vision established by the founders of our community in the 1920s. Why do I think we need new leadership? In 2012, the board voted unanimously to sell 1.7 acres of parkland to a private resident who had built extensive encroachments over the previous 36 years. This was the first time the PVHA strayed from its mandate to be the defender of the underlying deed restrictions prohibiting such sales. In 2013, I became aware of the sale and urged the PVHA to reverse the transaction. And then when that was ignored, I filed a lawsuit. This was the first time in my life that I initiated or was part of any litigation. We did win in the Superior Court and then unanimously on appeal. We were told by the PVHA president that pursuing an appeal would cost PVHA nothing because of insurance. But as a result of these bad decisions, the board took $1 million of reserves and burned that down to $56,000 that we have today. We need better stewardship than that. Having invested some 2,000 hours in these matters, I feel I have an excellent grasp of issues and challenges and prepared to roll up my sleeves and work towards solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Reed.
Hi, I know this is a busy holiday season. Those people that are here tonight or watching really appreciate you being here, and also thanks to the League of Women's Voter. This is my actually the 4th candidate forum I've participated in. Rather than review my past work experience, as I've done before, and that can also be viewed on the PVHA website, I'd like to share with you what I've actually experienced and accomplished in the last few years. In attempting to serve on the PVHA, I've attended their board meetings, analyzed their financials, became familiar with their bylaws and covenants, reviewed the meetings minutes for actually a few decades, become familiar with their working operations and their deficiencies. I was active in opposing the past board's attempt to sell parkland and to prevent democratic elections, and along with John, participated in the settlement to resolve these past mistakes by the board. My understanding of the PVHA greatly increased with my application to the art jury to rebuild a home, modify a porch, and install solar panels. I also experienced a view mediation. So I understand how much stress and even the miseries that these processes can cause owners. From this experience, it was evident to me that there are inefficiencies and sometimes substantial delays between the city and PVHA in granting permits of months and even years. I had a neighbor that took 7 years to build his house. That's unacceptable. It's my belief this negativity affects our property values and needs to be changed. If elected, this is a major issue I'll attempt to improve. Of great concern, it appears the PVHA is in a rather precarious situation. Its assets, as you heard, have dropped to only about $50,000 and has dropped several $100,000 in just the last 3 years. Its website is dated, and incidentally, I do have some web experience, so I could maybe help you out with that a little bit. Anyway, if elected to the board, I pledge to address these issues, and I hope you vote in the coming election. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles?
Good evening. My name is Charles Tang, and first of all, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for organizing this forum, and also I'd like to thank my neighbors for showing up tonight. And thirdly, I'd like to thank the current PVHA Board of Directors for allowing me to join their team for the last couple of months. So it's been a pleasure, and it's given me the opportunity to understand the myriad of problems facing our community. My family and I have lived in Palos Verdes Estates for the last 25 years. I've raised 3 of my kids in this neighborhood. And I want to preserve this neighborhood. That's the reason I'm on the board. So I love Palos Verdes Estates. I want to keep it the way it is. And the protective restrictions and standards are essential in doing that. So I want to enforce it. So in terms of my background, I spent 35 years in both management and staff positions at the Aerospace Corporation. After I retired, became a serial entrepreneur. I created 3 companies: a technology venture capital firm, a real estate investment company, and also a nonprofit educational company to help the disadvantaged. In addition, to this day, I continue to teach at LMU and USC. I have degrees in an MBA from Loyola Marymount University, as well as a doctorate from USC. PVE and Mirrorless will face many challenges in the future, such as views, trees, building constraints, state-mandated ADUs, and planned proliferation of 5G cell towers. I want to use the CCNRs to protect our city. So in working with the city and federal government, in my prior experience, I've been able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to start with our questions. We're going to start with Gain and work our way down and end with Marlene. So we got to get the microphone. Okay. So you have up to a minute and a half. You don't have to use the whole minute and a half, but you can, certainly. Everyone's going to answer this question. So can each candidate describe their living experience in Palos Verdes? When did you move here? What neighborhood do you live in? Based on your tenure and the neighborhood you live in, what will you do to represent all property owners?
So I live in, oh my goodness, I just blanked on it. I live in Montemalaga, and that's the only area that I've lived in PVE. I haven't moved around within PVE. My experience with wanting to relate to all the other communities that live here would be that I've been very engaged with the Palos Verdes Homes Association since 2011 with regard to view restorations. Very, very engaged. And I think as many other people have been engaged and been fighting or in conflict or in concert with the Home Association, trying to protect their views, the ones they bought when they moved into their home, or the ones that they've now lost because of giant ficus hedges or vegetation or overgrowth of trees, etc. So I think we all share that in common. I would be fighting to enforce what you first got when you first moved here and is protected by these original CCNRs from 1923.
Thank you. Dick.
I moved here in the very early 70s. It's in the
Dick, I think you turned it off.
I moved
That's
here.
better.
I moved here in the early '70s into Lenata Bay. My first wife and I raised 2 kids here. My daughter walked to school for 13 years. My son got caught up in the school closing situation and wasn't able to do that. We split up in the mid-'90s, and I moved to Redondo Beach. And then I've since remarried, and in 2009 moved into Malaga. 2008, I'm sorry. So I've lived in 2 sections of PV. I know a lot of people throughout the whole city, because I'm also at the golf club, and like I think all of us love it here and want to try and preserve the life that we bought into.
Thank you. John?
So I moved here in 1991 into Monte Malaga, where we're still living in the same home with my wife Renata and our 2 sons. Our 2 sons went through the public schools here in Monte Malaga and then PVIS, which is now the high school, and Peninsula is where they went to in high school. I believe very passionately in this being a very special community. We are very unique in this country because we have, it was a planned community back in the 1920s. A lot of thought was given into it. The book that Gain mentioned there is very thoughtful, anticipating a lot of scenarios to try to preserve things for a very long period of time. So we have a guide look. That's kind of our constitution. I believe we ought to follow it. I believe rules are meant and laws are meant to be followed, and we should be doing that. Now, as far as encroachments, I think we need to tackle the major encroachments that are out there, and we ought to have significant things for that. So I think it's a special place. Very few communities have as much open space as we have. Very few communities have the beauty that we have, and it's very important to preserve all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Reed?
Hi. I'm newer than most people up here and possibly in the crowd, but I've still been here for 15 years. So what attracted me to Palos Verdes Estates is its beauty. The ocean, the views, the landscaping, and also the history with the Olmsted. I think those of you that are familiar a little bit with the Olmsted are familiar with really how unique our community is. So in looking at different communities, we found an area that we liked in Malaga Cove. So we've been in that area, bought a home in 2004. After 2 years, we had some view issues, and we actually moved about a block away where we had fewer view issues and where we thought the house would also functionally work out better for us. So we've enjoyed our house. I spent 2 years remodeling it. So I've gone through this whole process with the PVHA and the art jury, and it's been a challenge, as I mentioned earlier. One of the things I've done is become very active in some of the communities. I've been a member of the Malaga Cove Homeowners Advisory Board. I've been a parkland ranger. It's enabled me to actually see the whole area. I have actually walked over 30 miles of trails, over several hundred miles of acres of parkland, and I understand it well, and I appreciate it. And with your support, hopefully I can continue to protect and preserve our parklands. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles?
My family and I raised 3 kids in Lenata Bay. The kids have went through elementary school starting with Lenata Bay Elementary and gone through PV High as well as Peninsula High. So we have a very good idea of what the neighborhood is like, and we love this neighborhood. We had lots of opportunities when we were shopping around for a home to move to other parts of PV, but we just love this neighborhood. So now, as far as what I would do for the community, I understand the having been served on the PVHA board for several months, I understand the issues facing the residents of PVE as well as Miralus, which is also included in the CCNRs. And I want to work on getting the community together to fight some of these other battles that need to be fought, like proliferation of cell phone towers and ADUs, and as well as resolve some of the views and tree issues that we have facing our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And Marlene, so we need to bring the mic down to Marlene. The one drawback of one mic. All right, go
Well,
ahead.
again, we're good, right? You can hear me? Okay.
That's good, yeah.
There we are. Okay. We've lived in PVE since 1985. My husband and I moved here with our young children, and they've gone through the schools. I think what attracted us was the open space, and we're just a block in from the cliffs. We're on Chelsea, which is a really good kid street. Halloween was amazing this year. And I think the ability for the kids to be able to walk to school, for us to be able to walk up to the market. My business is 3 blocks from my house. This is like the ideal community. We have fresh ocean air, beautiful architecture, beautiful landscaping. It's something that is unique in Southern California and is becoming more and more rare. And I think it's something that needs to be protected. A lot of people will talk about monetary value and various things, but what Olmsted was really looking at was a particular quality of life, and I think those are the things that we're looking to preserve. And so when we're talking about cell towers and ADUs, we have a lot of challenges coming. The views issue is just a starter. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to start with Dick here. And the question is, how important is lowering the quorum from 50% to 35%, and why?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important that we lower the quorum. We have not had a valid election since 2009. And there have been years when the Homes Association tried very hard with 3 mailings, but we never got to the 50%. Without a valid election, the board is basically just perpetuates itself. It's very non-democratic, and it's just not a very good system. The 35% was something that was, I think, resolved as part of a settlement. I personally think it'd be better at 25, but or actually have even a better system, which is a little complicated. But in any case, I think you should all vote to lower the 35. If we don't do that, we're going to be stuck with 50 for a very long time.
Thank you. John.
I'd like to just echo Dick's comments there. This is not a new problem. When we were going through some of the litigation launched to try to create a more democratic process for the Homes Association, we went through all the old board minutes and all the old newspaper articles, and there's been a lot of people out there who are frustrated that they haven't been able to elect their representatives because of this quorum requirement. Only 29% of the time since 1941 has a quorum been reached. It's at 3 out of the last 25 years. And it's very significant. At this point, as a result of not achieving a quorum, none of the members of the current board have ever been elected. And we have, and the problem with that is then we're not responsive to the needs of the community. If everything's going fine, it's not a problem. But when there's something happens that people have a difference of opinion and want to have new leadership, we're kind of stuck without that kind of democratic process. So I think it's very important. In fact, I say the most important thing in this election isn't which of us you choose to elect to serve you. The most important in this election is this quorum so that we can have a shot at it. 25% would be a much better number. That's what we advocated with when we were trying to get the Homes Association to do that. But the first step is we have to do 35 before we get there.
Thank you. Reed.
I totally agree with what has been said just now. We need to lower the quorum. It just 50% is, a lot of you know, in a lot of mayoral, even national elections. You're lucky to get maybe 30, 40%. I think in the last mayor election with LA, they only had 19, 20%. So our quorum amount of 50% is just way too high. We've also had, I think, a different composition with basically our communities. Some people maybe have second homes here, maybe don't spend full year here, maybe they aren't as likely to vote. I think that also hurts the turnout. So along with John and others, I've actually fought to lower this quorum. It's taken 2 years. We were in court, and we had a very difficult time getting the past directors to make any sort of improvements on lowering the quorum at all. In fact, they even claimed in court that the PVHA is not a democracy. They didn't want an election. And that's sad that we have board members in the past that have been that way. And we still have a couple that still serve on the board that had supported that. So we need to make changes. We need to have a quorum. And if you haven't voted yet, I encourage you to vote. And if you know of some friends, please be sure that they voted too. We still have about 600 or 700 votes more than we need, or more to obtain in order to get a quorum. So hopefully we can get that. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles?
On the quorum issue, initially I supported full-heartedly lowering the quorum to whatever number it is, 35% or even lower. So it sounded like a good idea, because lowering the quorum requirements would allow fewer people to make decisions that are binding. So on the surface, it seems to make sense. But upon talking to my neighbors, as I was collecting signatures for the petition to be placed on the ballot, one of the things that they pointed out to me, that lowering the quorum actually means that a minority of the residents will be able to push their way through, as opposed to a 50% majority. So the question, the caution that I raise is that I want to make sure that the majority view is preserved, and that lowering the quorum requirements is not going to take that away from the majority of the residents here.
Okay, thank you. And now we need the microphone down here to Marlene. Okay.
Okay. I think we've all brought up some really good points about the quorum. I support lowering the quorum. I've seen what happens when we don't get enough of the community participating. And of course, 25% is a minimum number. 35 will work. And of course, we welcome more. I mean, if people turn out and they're interested in what's going on, and we get more than 35% people voting, that's icing on the cake. But the 35% is really crucial for this organization to be able to move forward, and it will give PVHA the ability to adapt to the changing circumstances and to address some issues that are really important and need to be tended to ASAP. Thank you.
Thank you. Gain.
So my answer to this question about lowering the quorum is, I don't think it's that critical as to a percent. I think, what does the homeowners that all live in this area, that are all under this PVHA association, what do they want to lower it to? Do they want it 25%, 35%? I'm willing to go to whatever percent they want to lower it to. I think the question is responsiveness and responsibility and accountability of your elected representatives, because the quorum is going to elect them. Secondly, I think we should put in term limits, so that regardless of how low we put the quorum, we should have a term limit that no matter what, whether they get elected or appointed, that they can't serve, let's say, more than 2 terms. And I think we would get more accountability. The question here is, we need accountability of our elected representatives regardless of what percent we lower the quorum to. I think we do have issues with all the voters' responsiveness, and I would add email to all of the mailing, online ability to email, vote, or vote online securely, etc. So that's my answer to this question.
Thank you. All right, we're going to start with John. This question is about Miralest representation. Since no director candidate is from Miralest, how would you assure that Miralest homeowners' issues would be adequately presented and considered with a PVE exclusive board?
Okay, I'd like to maybe start with the question you asked about how do you be responsive to all the communities. And I've had the privilege of serving on over a dozen board of directors of for-profit companies and not-for-profit entities. And it's very important in any board in which I serve that I'm representing all of the stakeholders and all of the shareholders. In fact, you have a fiduciary duty to do so. So I think this is not a matter of representation from one part of PV or Miralest or whatever. I think you need to represent everybody. As far as knowing what the issues are, I'm a big supporter of greater communication and greater transparency. So I would advocate having more open forums where, as directors, we would go out and invite people to come talk to us about what their issues are, and invite members of the community directly interact with us so that we understand what their issues are and what those differences might be through different parts of our community. So I think it's very important to respect the needs of all of our community, including Miralest, but it doesn't necessarily mean we need to have a representative from Miralest, just as we don't need one from Lanada Bay or Valmonte or Monte Malago or Malaga Cove. We all represent all of our constituents.
Thank you. Reed.
Yes, I agree. Anyone that serves on the board needs to represent all the communities. So having someone from Miralest would be nice. It would be an appropriate thing to do. And I think that what we can do is, I think as was mentioned earlier, we don't have a good really comprehensive email list. We need to build that up and be able to contact people like in Miralest so that they're more aware of, for instance, like running for the board and contacting them. Also, I think a tradition that we've had in the past is always to have an annual meeting over at Miralest. I think that should be continued. And in that meeting, we should open things up for communications with them, to allow them to participate more. And we haven't, the board really hasn't had any subcommittees. And I think we can get more involvement by having some subcommittees for things like parklands, maybe on the view issue, and some other things where we can also engage the Miralest people in committees like that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles.
I think it's very important to get representation for all the people that are embodied within the PV Homes Association. The current board has a representative from Miralest. So, and we do have meetings once a year at the Miralest site. So I think it's to be able to encompass the needs of the whole. I like John's idea of having forums and soliciting community input, regardless where they sit, whether they're with the PVE or from the Miralest area of Rancho Palos Verdes. I think it's a great way to get feedback from the community. But I think it's also essential for them to have some voting authority within the Homes Association.
Thank you. Okay, down to Marlene.
Okay, I'm going to try not to repeat what some of the other people have said because they're all really good comments. On the topic of subcommittees, this year we've also actually started that process. We have 3 or 4 subcommittees running right now in the Homes Association, and one of them is for views, there's one for communication, there's another one for something really interesting. In 2022, there's going to be a National Olmsted Celebration, and I think that's an opportunity for PVHA to really open its doors and to help educate the community, bring some historical information out, and get us all excited about where we live. As far as representing the other areas of Palos Verdes Estates and Mira Leste, fortunately, with my business as a landscape designer, I've worked all over the hill, and I've worked also off the hill. And the Mira Leste residents respond to RPV as a city, so the structure is a little bit different. But it's been really exciting to see how each community has a different character and different concerns. And I think that by experiencing these communities, I'll be able to bring that to the board and represent them effectively.
Thank you. Gain.
So Rancho PV is very interesting. My husband and I lived there for 3 years before we moved to PVE. We do know some of the issues there. I will agree, though, I think Mira Leste is a very unique situation that does demand their own representation because they're under our HOA, but under the city requirements and codes, et cetera, of Rancho PV. So, however, I would like to put that to a vote of all the HOA members. My guess would be that because there's only something like 343 lots or, voting members of Mira Leste, that might not pass. So I think it would be a good idea to put on a ballot something like that to say, can we have a permanent representative from Mira Leste? I like the idea, but I do think it probably should be put to a vote. They might get outvoted or not, but at least let's hear what the communities, all the other communities want to say about it, because it is very unique as opposed to all the other areas in PVE. Thank you.
Thank you. Dick.
Well, I think it is important that we do serve the entire protected area.
It's,
I do think it's important. I do
think-
think it's important that we do take care of the entire protected area, which includes Mira Leste. But the Mira Leste people themselves need to get involved also. There's nothing that prevented any one of them from trying to run in the selection. They can sign up for our email blasts. We can probably find some other ways to communicate with them. We do meet over there once a year. We could probably work with Carol to get some people that would be involved in Mira Leste. I will say that serving on our board and living in Mira Leste is real service. I mean, because it's not a fun drive, and it's and the way the meetings work, there's often tremendous traffic issues that you have to deal with.
okay, thank you. All right, the next question, we're going to start with Reed. Okay. What are your top areas of initial focus should you become a director?
I have a list.
Okay, go for it.
Fortunately, it's not right in front of me. There's quite a few. I think communications, building the website better. We have no social media presence. Even though there may be an email blast. Dick, do you know how many people that are on that blast? About 30 out of 5,500 homes. Doesn't sound very good, does it? It's horrible. I mean, we really have fallen, the past directors, I don't know, there's a lot to be done. The finances, as maybe has been brought up, are also dismal. Actually, we barely have, I think, some funds. What is it, about $50,000, Dick? And then there's also some obligations of other obligations, but and then every year I think, as far as trying to know more about the PVHA, we need to have like an email list where we can send out communications, like our newsletters, let people know what's going on. This view situation is very important. We need to address that. We need to have the rights to have views. We can't have these disappear. It really affects our values. So those are some of the issues. I think I'm running out of a little time, this lady up in front. If elected to the board, I'm committed to making the needed changes to really improve the PVHA and make this a better communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Reed. Charles.
Thank you, Reed, for allowing me Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Reed, for allowing me to pull up my list of activities. I have 3 major priorities, which if I am elected, I will continue to work on. So the first one is unify the community to be able to address future challenges. So realize that that's pretty broad. So how would I do that? Establishing forums to increase communication for community involvement and awareness of issues. Increase website usage. I think some of the other candidates have mentioned that. Increase publications and white papers to put forth solutions, proposed solutions, or proposed changes to rules. Continue the communications committee that's been formed and headed by Dick. And continue the landscaping committee, the work that's being undertaken and headed up by Marlene. And then finally start the finance committee, which I will head up. Then, and provide more clarity in the CCNRs, because right now the CCNRs are somewhat nebulous. Then finally, restore financial health to the PVHA. We've run into a budget shortfall, as you've noticed from the financial statement. And so what I want to do is put together a 3-year plan.
Okay, thank you.
Address that.
Time is up. Sorry. Down to Marlene. Your top areas of initial focus.
Okay. As mentioned, I've been working on some of the landscape issues, which I hope to wrap up soon and get on to other things. One of the things that came out of that is we're looking to produce a little booklet about the landscaping in Palos Verdes and explaining to residents the proper care for plants, what historically has been used here, what are excellent replacements that will help preserve views, a lot of interesting things. If that is successful, we may move into the architectural arena and do something similar. So I'm really focused on the design aspects of the city, with how the city works in terms of urban planning. Community outreach is another biggie. We're talking about forums, but I also want to see fun stuff. I want to see things that will bring the community in and make us all feel good about where we live. And so I am concerned about the ADU and the JADU issue. I think it's really going to change the entire complexion of our city, and that's a very serious issue that's coming up. So any way that we can work with those within our CCNRs to try and fight that, I am all in for that fight. Thank you.
Thank you. Gain.
So my top priority would be, number one, try to settle or come to some kind of an agreement over the current lawsuit facing the PVHA, which is more than $1 million. I think we really can't afford another bloody all-out war that takes 10 or 11 years and goes all the way to the California Supreme Court. There's no way. We just don't have the money. So that's number one. Number two, I think to do that is to go back to the original 1923 CCNRs. There is nothing vague. This is not nebulous. This is English, and I can read it. It's even at the 2nd grade level. I can read it. So I think everyone else can read it, and you buy here, you get one of these. And I kept mine, and I've read it and reread it and highlighted in pink and yellow. And it's very, very specific. It talks all about enforcement and what I'm guaranteed when I buy a house here. So I would go to that. Then secondly, fiscal responsibility. I think we've got to get trimmed down those $850,000 legal fees we had last year, or the previous year, $140,000, the year before that, $110,000. That's not sustainable, even though I know the plaintiff lawyers like it. We can't afford it. Number three, and additionally really carefully look at that budget. $84,000 for meetings and postage and all the envelopes and all this other kind of stuff. We've got to get online to save money. Thank you.
Thank you. Dick.
Well, first of all, I would like to get the view issue behind us. As I said earlier, I think we passed a bad resolution, and our meetings since then have been taken up with a tremendous amount of time has been taken up discussing the views that I think was a self-imposed thing by the board. We talk about communication. It's not going as fast as I would like, but we are going to improve the website. We do have the system in place for blasts. People just have to sign up. The thing that's probably, in my mind, bigger though than either one of them is to work with the city on the ADU issue and the JADU and some other issues that all relate to the California housing crisis and how the state of California is trying to dictate what goes on in the local communities. And we have to also get our hands around, continue to keep our hands around the finance situation.
Thank you. John?
I'd like to echo, I have a similar list here, and a number of the things have been brought up are on my list as well. I fully agree that we need to fix this view policy by replacing that resolution, which took away rights of half our residents to pursue view blockage. I do think we should be pushing back on the state, which is trying to usurp our local authority on the ADU issue and some of the housing density issues. The Green Book mentions single-family residency many times in there. We can define what single-family residency, and we can stick by that. There's a lot we can do in communication. But I'd like to say there are three things that I haven't heard brought up that I'd like to mention I think are things we should tackle. One is I think we can improve the art jury proposal process by making it more transparent. It's not this guessing game, creating a design and showing to them, no, we don't like it, come back with something else. Publish what you're looking for with a tutor, publish what you're looking for with a colonial, make it easier for people. The second is maintenance of our parklands and trails. We have the right to demand that the city of Palos Verdes enforces removal of parkland encroachments and better maintain the parkland and trails, and we should put the pressure on the city to do that. And then the third thing, which we haven't mentioned, which I think is important, it's not sexy, but we need to digitize our records. All of our plans and all of our documents are through the walls here, and if this place burns down or is lost in an earthquake, we're going to have total chaos figuring out what it is. So we need to digitize that.
Thank you, John. Your time is up. Okay, we're going to start with Charles on this next question. Do you believe property owners should have to give up land they have encroached on, improving it with structures or landscaping, unwittingly and innocently?
I'm not too sure I understand the question.
The way I'm reading it, this person, I think, is suggesting that if a property owner has unwittingly and innocently encroached upon land, then, and they've improved it and landscaped and put structures and whatnot, should they have to give it up?
If a property owner encroached upon, let's say, public lands or private lands,
Yeah.
That do not belong to them, there needs to be some recourse. There needs to be some settlement made. If otherwise, you'd be taking property away from somebody else, or you would be taking away public lands, which from that standpoint, I would say there would be some negotiation that needs to go on, and reasonable compensation needs to be afforded to whoever gains and whoever loses the property.
Okay, thank you. And the microphone down to Marlene. And oh, Reed's going to do the easy way. Very good.
All right. In my experience, encroachments need to go. Basically, you're taking over somebody else's property, whether it's your neighbor's property or it's the property that we all own in community. Again, when you move here, you get all the paperwork, you know where your property lines are. I'm sorry to all the people that may have unwittingly encroached, but it's not the correct thing to do in our city, and it needs to be corrected.
Thank you. Jane.
I think rules are rules. Now, I realize everyone wants to go run around and say, well, there's always exceptions to the rules. And I actually am one of the first ones to say that. However, in this particular case, because we have limited parklands and limited open space. We do need to respect those rules here. I don't think that we can go down the road in that dirty rabbit hole of selling parkland again, just because someone says, oh, oops, sorry, I put my bathroom over there and I didn't check it out. I didn't get a lot survey or hire a surveyor for $1,000. I just did it anyway. We've seen that's very painful for the home association to go down that rabbit hole. I don't think we should do it again. We do have to respect property lines and who actually owns those parklands. The city does, and that's that.
Thank you. Dick?
I agree completely that the encroached land needs to be returned to the city. I guess it's just that simple.
Okay, thank you. John?
Back in 2013, Reed and I walked all of our lanes and paths and parklands and made an inventory of all these encroachments with pictures and photos and diagrams and maps, and we've presented that to the city. Today, about 20% of those have been fixed. So that's not an acceptable outcome. The rules and laws need to be abided, and the restrictions don't give you the option to get out of that. The problem is it's too easy to ignore the direction you're given from the city to remove these things. And there's so many instances of that happening, going through all the processes in these chambers, decisions being made, and then nothing happens. I wrote up a proposal and I gave it to the city council earlier this year. And the proposal is we need to make the penalties much, much higher. And penalties that keep going up to the point where people will view it in their own self-interest to implement the direction that they're given. So if you start with a big number like $10,000 or $20,000, every 6 months that you don't do it, it doubles. Pretty soon somebody who's been parking out on parkland will get the word and do that. An important part of that is an amnesty period. So for the first year, everybody has an amnesty to be able to fix up whatever they have without any penalty at all. But after that, if you haven't taken care of it, it will become your problem, and if you get caught with it, you will have the penalty. It's not like you have a penalty if you don't do anything. You need to take care of it now, and that's the way I would solve it.
Thank you, John. Reed?
We saw all sorts of encroachments on the study that we've done. Some of them were walls on parklands that prevented other people from actually accessing other areas of parklands, like entrances to parklands. There were some basketball courts, a lot of gardens, different degrees. There was some fencing. Sometimes there was even some garages, some improvements on parklands. The parklands are not an individual's own property. So I agree that that has to be resolved. Now, when it's something like a house or something, or like a garage, normally we didn't see it. It's normally like the landscape improvements that are encroachments, not an actual house or something. But those can be modified. And so I think that we should uphold these, our parkland rights and, have these encroachments resolved. And one thing on the encroachments, another issue is that there's two types of encroachments, on parkland and on right-of-way. And I think to some extent on the right-of-way, there could be a little leeway more in planning, maybe some other issues, but we do have some policies on this, and I think they need to be enforced.
Okay, thank you. We're going to start with Marlene on this one. Okay, is the mic on? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. What is your position on metal, tin, black tile roofs?
The choice of the roofing material, I think, has to do with two things. One has to do with the style of the house, because there are certain styles of houses that are appropriate to have metal roofing. The other thing that's changed recently because of all the fires is that we've relaxed some of those restrictions for roofing due to fire. My house has a shake roof. If we choose to remodel, we will have to use a different type of roof. And so your choices are to go with a tile roof or a slate roof. Because my house is not structured for those things, having the option of doing a metal roof might be appropriate if the style of my house can accommodate that. So it is a design issue rather than do you like this or not like this? Is this appropriate or not appropriate? I think it has to do with the individual situation.
Okay, thank you. Gain.
So here we get to the emails, having everyone's emails, because what I would do is send out a survey monkey to everybody's email who are all HOA members of the PVHA and find out what are their thoughts on it, because the PVHA's number one line of business, as it says for 3 years running straight in the audited financial reports, our number one line of business is to enforce the deed restrictions and help the HOA members with architectural review. So if we do want to change the architectural review and allow tin or metal or green roofs, whatever we're going to allow, I think we should have a flexible HOA that's responsive to all the HOA members, especially when things change, but we could do it with a survey monkey, with everyone involved. Everyone vote on it, email, whatever. So we can have the flexibility if we do need to change. When I first moved here, we wanted to put solar on the roof, and it was denied for 15 years. Luckily, federal law changed, and this community had to allow us to install solar roof. I even had all the solar panels delivered to the driveway. Had to send them all back. It was massive. So I do think we need flexibility for things like solar roof, solar installations. That's my thought.
Thank you. Dick.
I think I would leave it up to the art jury. I really have not, I will confess, I have not thought much about having metal roofs and PVE, and I don't think it's something that I would support. I am happy that we can have the solar material, and we certainly need to have materials that that are not conducive to fires. But I don't know, metal, tin kind of roofs, I don't think I find them very attractive.
And also black tile, Assessor.
And black.
John.
I will acknowledge I'm not a roofing expert. I think obviously roofs need to have basic safety concerns in terms of fire resistance and things like that. But ultimately, it's not the role of the board of PVHA to make those architectural decisions. We have a separate body. It is the role of this board to select the art jury and to make sure that they're going through a normal process and a good process to evolve. I think Gaines' point is important in that since 1920 things have changed. We don't all our houses look exactly like they look in 1920. Nobody had thought of solar panels or other things that are in there. So I think these things do need to evolve, but I also agree with Marlene that there needs to be some kind of an architectural integrity and consistency. But I don't think that's the kind of thing that the board really ought to weigh in, because we really don't have the expertise to do that.
Thank you. Reed.
I agree that this situation would require art jury approval, so it would be a consideration for them. But I'd like to say that in our CC&Rs, the covenants do limit the type of roofing material. And if we really go by our CC&Rs, not sure there's too many provisions for the metal roof. So there would have to be an exception made for that. Now I have looked at the CC&Rs, but they're pretty voluminous. There's a lot of issues with them. I do know that there's been some exceptions where, like in some communities that have a variety of housing, that there's more different types of roofs that have been allowed in the past. But where you have a community, say for instance, it's all red tile roofs, it would seem to me that it would be inappropriate to have one that would stand out with a black tile roof. But here again, that decision would be up to the art jury.
Okay, thank you. Charles.
I agree. The art jury would have ultimate say in terms of whether a certain roofing material can be implemented. But I see it as a system integration problem, because I deal with complex systems for many, many years while I was working. So the question is, will that particular type of roof fit in the context of the style of the home? So that's an art jury decision. It's not to rule out one material over another, but does it fit within the context of the house? Does it fit within the context of the community? The whole idea is to preserve our neighborhood neighborhood's character. So it looks, continues to look as attractive as it is as a whole. So I leave it up to the art jury to make that decision. But again, it's an integration problem and not just a matter of materials.
Okay, thank you. We're going to start the next question with Gain. Okay. If the PVHA will not regulate tree disputes, what should happen when they occur in terms of the process?
Wow, that's a very loaded question if they won't regulate them, because that's their number one line of mission, their business. It says so on the audited financial reports, to enforce deed restrictions. And if you read these CC&Rs, that is their job. So if they don't enforce it, what ends up happening is neighbors have to fight it out in the streets among themselves, or go to court to fight in court. Or as has happened with the encroachments that John had, he had to be in court for 10, 11 years fighting someone else that was encroaching something if your PVHA fails to support you in something and do something right. So unfortunately, that causes a terrible division in the community. It costs millions of dollars. As we've seen, it was over $1.1 million in legal fees and has almost bankrupted the HOA here. The consequences are very painful. It pits neighbor against neighbor. I think it's not a good idea to not enforce what you're supposed to do, what your number one line of business is to do.
Okay, great, thank you. Dick?
I think no matter what, you have tremendous controversy and you wind up with neighbor against neighbor. I think our role, in my understanding is that in California, you do not have a right to a view. We will give you the right because we will define that you have that right in PVE and Miralest. And even though Miralest is different because they've got, RPV does have a view resolution or view ordinance. So we will define that you have a right to a view. We will define a process that we suggest you follow, which starts with trying to work it out with the neighbor. If you can't work it out, we suggest that you hire a mediator. If you can't work it out with the mediator, then you go to court. But for us to get involved means that all you people out there that may not have views, that your money is now going to be spent on lawsuits for the people that do. And if that's what you want, that's fine. But Marlene or Gay talks about bankrupting. I mean, that's down the road. So our current lawyer tried to mitigate the problem by limiting the number of views that you could even talk about to adjoining, and I think that was a big mistake.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, the premise on that rewrite in the spring was to try to eliminate the number of things that could be disputed, and I don't think that's the answer. I do agree with Gain. It is a responsibility of the PVHA to try to help resolve these things. The current process actually does protect the PVHA because you sign a waiver that says that you're not going to sue the PVHA, and so that's not our problem. The things that we've been sued about relate to things that are really bad decisions as opposed to specific decisions on trees and views. I think there does need to be a process, and I think that people need to be, try to work it out. I think what Dick said is the appropriate set of things. We need to clarify how you decide how you balance trees and views, and have that all written down, and then try to go through a mediator. I think we can facilitate finding a mediator. But ultimately, that's to be worked out between the various people. I think we also can guide people to say, when you move into a house, take a lot of pictures, and I think you should be able to preserve the view that you see when you have the house. I don't think people should be buying a house and then going around and cutting down all their neighbors' trees in order to create views that were really not there when you bought the house. But I think you do have an opportunity to preserve what you have at the time you buy the house.
Thank you. Reed?
Yes, I think there's a clarification and with the views that there's really two types. Ones that might be obstructed on someone's personal property on their own lot versus maybe obstruction that's on parkland or right-of-way, that's public land. And so sometimes I've seen where people have come to the PVHA and actually it really involves a tree that's on right-of-way and not really on a individual lot. And so people should understand that there's currently like two requirements or two kind of sets of restrictions on how to resolve that. They aren't exactly alike, and I think we should try to make an effort to have the efforts to resolve the way it's done by the city as opposed to the PVHA. They should be more similar. We should have a way of doing it. I also think with mediation, in the past, the PVHA has allowed for that. They had an attorney that provided mediation. They no longer do. I think I've actually gone through the mediation process. I think it was helpful. I think it's hard sometimes if you don't have any success in I think most of us has probably been through this process either on one side or the other, either trying to protect our privacy or trying to protect our views. And in doing so, it can be challenging. And I think by having someone like a mediator, like the PVHA, to step in, I think can be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles.
And I realize that conflicts between neighbors can be very complicated. They're between views and trees. It's complex and it's unique to the situation. So I agree with what Dick had mentioned. It's important to have a clear-cut process of how addressing it from beginning to end. Hopefully we don't get to the end point where the end point is legal action against one's neighbor. So having a clear-cut process would be helpful in taking small steps before we get there.
Okay.
Now, as far as developing baseline, to be able to capture what we had bought into. So if you bought an expensive home with a great view, you should be able to capture a baseline of what you had purchased into. So I think it's important to document what the kind of views or trees you have. So those are my thoughts in terms of views versus trees.
Okay. Thank you. Marlene.
Okay, we're in my wheelhouse here. There are a lot of different ways to regulate, and we've been unsuccessful in the past with some of the policies that were recently implemented at the PVHA. Actually, the majority of the view issues that have come to the PVHA while we had a mediator on staff were resolved. The amount that are serious issues that have not been able to get resolved and have gone to court, it's just a handful. It's not a large number. So overall, neighbor to neighbor, people have been able to resolve most of the issues. What we've been working on is actually clarifying what you need to define a view, to decide what the process is. Even when we talk about having a baseline view for a property, when you purchase a property, you take a picture, this is your view. But what happens if that property, if you demo the house and build a new house, do your views change? So there are a lot of complex issues, both legally and in definition-wise, that we've been working through. And I encourage everybody to send emails to the PVHA relating to views and your thoughts so that we can incorporate that important information.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, we're going to start with Dick. This has a little bit of a preamble to it, I guess. Malaga Cove Plaza landlords complain that the city-owned parking lot's too small. Some have lost tenants because of this, and customers, residents, and employees complain also. Some have suggested that city parkland near the plaza could be converted to extra parking. Does PVHA have a role to play in terms of converting parkland to different purposes? Is converting parkland to a parking lot a logical thing to do in this instance?
In my opinion, we do have a role, and that is to prevent it. I, I don't think it's logical to convert parkland to parking lot. It's not why we have the parkland. And the Malaga Cove people, I'm sympathetic to the parking situation, but I am more sympathetic that the parkland is a treasure. When I moved in 1971 or 72, the realtor told me how important it was, how valuable every inch of it was, and I believed her, and I still believe it today.
Okay, thank you. John?
I think the answer is pretty clear. The deed restrictions are not something that the PVHA board or the city can change. They are embedded and they are behind it. And the deed restriction specifically says that the parkland that's designated as parkland has those deed restrictions, says it must be maintained for public recreational use and cannot be sold for commercial activities. You cannot convert it into a parking lot. I'm sympathetic to the issue. There could be other solutions. You can have underground parking. There are other kinds of things that could potentially be done. But it's already been tested several times in the case. In 1939, the city tried to use parkland to build a building to store some of their operational vehicles. And that was challenged in court, and the court told the city they couldn't do that, and that was reversed. There have been multiple times where those kinds of cases have run through. So if we don't want to create more litigation, let's stop breaking the law. And that is clearly something that we really shouldn't be speaking to. So the Homes Association's role is to tell the city or anyone who wants to do that, sorry, you can't do that. There are deed restrictions that say you can't do it. We need to follow the deed restrictions.
Okay, thank you. Reed?
As others have just mentioned, no, we should not allow parkland to be used for parking for the Malaga Cove Plaza. They have other alternatives, and actually in the process of looking at the encroachments that have occurred, it was actually necessary to identify all the parklands, all the right-of-way, and PVE. I did that over a course of months. It's digitized. I can tell you that there's a couple options that the people at Malaga Cove Plaza could pursue. One of those is that the city actually owns a lot right next to the PVHA office. Some people refer to it as a rock garden. At one time, I think it was used for a gas station. And so that is actually city-owned. There could be something done with that for parking. There's also an area, if you're familiar with the PVE police, being a VIP ranger, I park in this lot that's across from the police station when I do my work. And next to that, there's actually, I think, some right-of-way area. So they could extend that lot, providing some more parking there. So there's some other alternatives, and I think by having the knowledge that I do, that I could help in those type of matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles?
I think what's important is to keep in mind that the mission of the PVHS is to protect the environment as it is today, according to the CCNRs, and converting that the park to parking lot doesn't achieve that. So I'm in concert with the other candidates here. I would not support converting that into a parking lot. That said, I do understand business needs, and the business needs to evolve. So there are various creative solutions, some which have been mentioned by Reed, but there are other ways in which we can grow our businesses in Malaga Cove without resorting to converting that park into parking lot space. In some of the other cities which I have investments in, we've used shuttles to shuttle customers into the parking structure, and providing alternatives for them to come visit the shops. So anyway, I would not I would not put a parking lot where the parklands are.
Okay, thank you. Marlene?
Okay, I think it's clear that parkland is not going to be turned into parking lots. We also have the same problem in Lunada Bay. I think it's just the nature of culture these days that we are more car-oriented. One of the beauties of our community is that it was actually designed for walkability. And it is possible to walk from my house to the commercial center, or it is possible to walk from Lunada Bay to Malaga Cove. And I think if we make our trails and our walkways more inviting and more attractive and easier to use, that would also be helpful for some of these issues. There's plenty of right-of-way, and there's a lot next to City Hall that's not a park. It's where the Peacock Jail is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So there are other options besides taking parkland to make parking, and I think we just need to be conscious of our lifestyle and carpool and take some alternatives. Originally, we had a train line running through Lunada Bay from Malaga Cove when the city was instituted, and people used to ride horses.
Yeah.
So I think we can evolve effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. Gain.
So there's no question you can't sell it, change, violate the deed restriction on it at all. I really think this is a traffic and parking problem. As one of my other volunteer activities, I'm acting chairperson of the PVE Traffic Safety Alliance. That is actually completely voluntary. It is not a government committee. And I started this actually and got some national help with it because I think the entire community needs to seriously relook at our traffic, our parking, our traffic jams, our clogging, everything. We need to really look at all the areas. This is, again, looking at just not where I live, but Valmonte, Lunada Bay, Malaga Cove, and I echo what Marlene is saying. We really do need to fix some of these problems because they crop up as sore spots for us over and over and over. And hopefully the Traffic Safety Committee will, that's part of the committee that advises the Palos Verdes City Council, can try to look at this and help with some of those, their own solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. The next one starts with John. He's prepared, I see. Okay. The state of California has mandated new laws for building accessory dwelling units, and these laws override city zoning restrictions and PVHA regulations. How do you address these new laws?
I think that's a very important issue for us. The first thing is I think it's important for the city and the Homes Association to work together with a common purpose and come up with a consolidated view that works. The underlying restrictions have always been viewed as something that is a contract that we all have to follow when we buy a house here, and it's not something that can be overridden by local government or even state government. The only times the CCNRs in the past have been changed, if you look at that green book, there's some areas that are whited out. And those were some things that said that certain people with certain ethnicity weren't allowed to live in Palos Verdes estates, and that was constitutionally wrong, and that got eventually changed in the things. But I don't think that the state has the opportunity, should have the opportunity to overturn those things. I do think we've got quite a case on that. I've been in many of the meetings in the city council where the ADU issue has been discussed, and it's obviously a tough issue, but it's something that is it's been said, like, for instance, oh, we don't want to be Huntington Beach, and Huntington Beach has got drawn the fire of Gavin Newsom and all this kind of stuff. Well, Huntington Beach just won an appeal, and they didn't have deed restrictions. It's not, a foregone conclusion that we can't help define our community and follow our own rules.
Thank you. Reed.
The state has decided to solve the housing problem by doing it and taking away deed restrictions and covenants, for instance, that we have with the PVHA that allow only for single-family homes. Can they do that? it's being challenged. And so I think we have to take a look at this very carefully, legally wise. And, you know, John mentioned a couple situations that's occurred, like in Huntington Beach. And we have to try to protect our communities, because in some situations this would really affect even some areas more than others. We have some very narrow streets, as we all know. If we have accessory dwelling units that are allowed in some of those homes on those narrow streets, where are those people going to park? We've got a major problem with this. And it's not only us, it's other communities around the whole state. So I think there's going to be a pushback on this. We have to pay attention to who's pushing the hardest. Maybe we can join with them. We also have to know the legal minds that are being successful with this and tap into that. So it's something we shouldn't accept what the state's automatically trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles?
ADUs are very important issues for a community like PVE. And so the way I would address it is to work with the state in revising perhaps an exception on applying the ADU law within PVE. Now, have I done that before? Yes, I have. It brings to mind a number of years ago when the FCC, the federal government, wanted to sell off spectrum for 4G communications. I actually took a number of trips out to the FCC, worked with them closely, and we were able to get exemption from selling a particular part of the spectrum for 4G. I intend to use my negotiating skills and my knowledge of the government to be able to do that as well for PVE. So not only for in terms of the ADUs, but also in terms of 5G wireless. That's also another topic that needs to be addressed within PVE.
Thank you. Marlene?
I want Charles and John on the ADU committee. I think that we're in a good position to fight this thing, or at least water it down. I'm not sure that what the state has proposed is completely legal. We have issues in PVE that other communities do not have. We have safety issues. We have issues with fire and traffic. If we needed to evacuate PVE, it could not happen effectively. We have limitations on utilities, the water, the power, the sewer. Our sewers are ancient. If we were to triple our density, which could happen if we had a complete build out with ADUs, the most recent iteration from the state is that you can have your permanent residence, you can put an ADU within your residence, and you can also have a detached ADU. And they've also changed some of the restrictions for side yards and setbacks, and a whole host of other things. And so the whole complexion of our community would change drastically. I think it would be dangerous for our community to follow what the state has told us we absolutely have to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Gain?
So again, I've had some experience with this issue. My husband and I lived in Coronado, and you talk about fighting for every inch. That was triple dense, and it was really ugly. They had illegal rentals, legal rentals. You did feel like you were on a rat ship, and I'm just not going back there. And that's why I moved here, because I just can't live in that kind of double, triple density, because just like Rita said, it's the narrow roads with the parking. Marlena said the utilities, the sewer. I mean, it does destroy your neighborhood. So I'm with fighting this legally, and I really think we're back to violating deed restrictions, and I'm really for enforcing all the deed restrictions. So that's my take on this.
Thank you. Dick?
Well, like everyone else, I am very much opposed to what the state is trying to shove down our throats. I think Charles has actually a great idea that deserves some serious consideration of trying to get some kind of special exemption. I'm not sure it'll be successful, but it's something I think that does need some more serious thought. I also think that we're not the only community, though, that's going to be very negatively impacted by this, and we probably should be joined together in some kind of a united front rather than to be the one city with the TEG case or the one homes association with the test case, and then see how much money we can spend with lawyers. But this would could negatively, dramatically impact Palos Verdes estates.
Thank you. Okay, we'll start the next question with Reed. Some feel that parkland trails need to be better maintained or even expanded. Others don't like seeing people walking on the trails and advocate for less or only limited, if any, public access to the parklands. What role do you see PVHA playing when it comes to access to and the maintenance of trails and parklands?
The parklands are, and right-of-way, are owned by the city. So the responsibility of the PVHA is more of a sentinel, to be sure, like from an encroachment standpoint that we talked a little bit about earlier, that if there's encroachments, they should be resolved. People shouldn't be encroaching. Those restrictions should be enforced. As far as using parklands, that's an entitlement that the residents have in living here. It's in our deed restrictions. We can use them for recreational purposes. So to say that, if somebody buys a home next to a trail or next to parkland, they know that when they buy it. And there's been some situations, maybe some of you are aware, where somebody didn't like the fact that he didn't do enough due diligence to know that he bought a home right next to a trail. And he didn't like people walking on it that sometimes he could hear walking behind his home. You need to do your due diligence anytime you buy a home. If you buy a home that's has an encroachment, if it's next to a trail, you should be willing to accept that and not try to change it for your own benefit. So as far as maintenance on the trails, I think there are some issues where we have different types of trails. I've actually categorized and labeled, I'm familiar with 30 miles of trails in PVE. Some of them are like asphalt, like when you come in, that they do need to be maintained. They get cracked. There's some other ones that are fine as far as their natural way. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles?
Parklands,
Okay, what role do you see PVHA playing when it comes to access to or maintenance of the trails and parklands?
okay. The maintenance of the parklands, if they're owned by the city, should be a city responsibility. As far as use of the trails and parklands, it would seem to me that, as Reed had pointed out, as residents of this community, we have bought into our property as well as the use of the parklands. The nature of parklands is just it should be a natural preserve in terms of being able to use it and without a lot of maintenance involved in the parklands. And so at this point in time, I don't think the PVHA should have much of a role in maintaining the trails and parklands, and other than to make sure the encroachments are not violated.
Okay, thank you. Down to Marlene.
It's true that it's the city responsibility to maintain the parklands, although I see no reason why PVHA could not advocate to make sure that the city does maintain things properly, so we can as residents be able to enjoy these areas that are given to us by virtue of our CC&Rs. They're meant for recreation, and those pathways were designed by Olmsted between houses and in various areas so that residents could walk from one street to another to visit a neighbor. Back at the time when our city was designed, cars were not as prolific as now. So people did a lot more walking, and these trails were intended to make it easy to be neighborly and to enjoy what the city has to offer. So So yes, so I think that the PVHA, although they do not actually maintain the parkland areas, I think we can certainly set some standards and encourage the city to do their job properly.
Thank you. Jane?
I echo what Marlene says about it's the city's responsibility, but this does bring up a very good point. We need to have better communication with the city. And we're very happy to see one of our city councilmen here tonight, listening very intently. I'm very happy, and thank you for coming. So what we really need to do is synchronize a lot of overlapping responsibilities, advocate for what we do represent, maybe help out the city in other ways and give feedback to them, synchronize, collaborate, communicate, and share. I think sharing is a really good point here. And Marlene brings this up. We all should be more neighborly and get all of the communities together. So my point here is let's get digital, let's get more into the 20th, 21st century, and email, communicate better, archive all of our messages together, and synchronize. Thank you.
Thank you. Dick?
Well, I do understand that basically the city's responsibility. I agree with Marlene that we could play a role in working with the city on this. I have nothing really too original to say that has not been said by the 5 people ahead of me.
Okay, thank you. John?
It is the city's role to maintain the parks for public recreational use. It is also the PVHA's role to intervene and even exercise reversionary rights if the city doesn't perform those roles properly. To give you an example, about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a move to close down part of the Paseo del Sol Fire Road up on the hillside here. And a group of residents along Via Elvado objected to the fact that people were walking behind their house on this road, and they said this was a new trail. I pointed out that one of those pictures in the hall out there from 1925 shows that trail and none of those houses. So, but anyway, and instead of the PVHA, in that case, the city did the right thing and denied it, but the PVHA actually wrote a letter, the president of the PVHA wrote a letter in support of putting a fence isolating 8 acres of parkland for the private use of the people on Via Elvado with no trespassing signs. I mean, the PVHA is going the wrong way, but I do think that the way it should work is that we should be looking after those requirements and intervene when it's necessary to try to make sure the city does follow the rules. And we do have some leverage in that through the reversionary rights.
Thank you. All right, we're going to start with Charles on this question. Lawsuits spent $800,000. Financial reserves are low. Plan fees are slowing. How would you fix the PVHA revenue problem?
As I indicated before, I've trying to put together a 3-year plan to recover financially from years of litigation. So some of the things I would do is to find additional sources of revenue for the PVHA. Now the PVHA is a nonprofit organization. So there are different ways in which nonprofit organizations can raise money. So think of the Red Cross, think of the Cancer Society. So there are so we can accept donations. We can also apply for grants. So there are a number of nonprofit organizations that I have worked for that we've applied for federal grants, and we've received money to do certain things to improve our certain aspects. So again, lastly, but most importantly, is to reduce the litigation expenses. It's important that we de-escalate the conflict between neighbors and find a pathway to reducing the litigation expenses.
Okay, thank you. Marlene, bring the mic down.
Okay, yeah, our big expense has been litigation, and we're working really hard to reduce that. I like the idea of procuring grants, even though it may not help in the litigation issues, it can take the pressure off of some of the other areas. We can use grants for archiving, we can use grants for community outreach, we can use grants for publications, and that's an area that I don't think has been explored to its best ability. And currently, the type of nonprofit that we are, any donations are not tax deductible. And so I don't know if there's a way to change our status so that when people do donate, they get a tax deduction. And I think there are also some issues about actually if PVE were to own a piece of property, it changes our status. And so I think there's a lot of things that we can do to explore creatively how to improve our financial situation.
Thank you. Jane.
So I think this gets to the heart of managing your own budget. As everyone out there knows, that's not that easy, but number one, you have to stop spending. Just stop spending so much money. Regardless of how it's coming in, that's first. Stop spending it. So when I looked at the last 3 years of the fiscal budget, the audited financial returns for the year, I noticed, for instance, the CPA account, paying tens of thousands of dollars to an accountant to go over 7 pages of accounts. I don't know what else they did, but that would be number one. Number two, $84,000 for meetings. Number three, $840-something thousand just this year alone in legal fees. Number five, postage. We can do emails. There are so many ways we could save. I went down every single thing. The food at some of the places. Can we bring our own food for the meetings? But I think stopping spending, how to increase income, the fees haven't been adjusted in years for the permits going through the archery. Let's adjust those and have them more reasonably reflect the current stage this year instead of reflecting what the fees were 20 years ago. That might bring us closer to balancing the budget.
Thank you. Dick.
Well, we have done some things. The office staff is, I believe, down one person from what it's been, and we're trying to see how that's going to work out. We're doing everything we can to try and stay out of litigation. I think some of the litigation expense is really old litigation where we're paying money now for sins in the past. The fees definitely need to be looked at. They haven't been increased, in my understanding, in some time, and they need to be looked at. And really, we should be doing everything we can. I agree with Gay, looking at every line item and say, how can we do this more efficiently? I'm hopeful that maybe Charles can find some ways we can bring in some revenue. But it is a big concern. With the past boards have built a war chest of well over $1 million, and it basically got depleted in a misguided litigation. But that's what we're stuck with.
Thank you. John.
Yeah, fundamentally, we should stop the litigation, but stop it by creating the problems by making bad decisions. So if you don't sell parklands, this view resolution, when it was presented to the board as we're doing this to reduce litigation, in my opinion, it creates a litigation. When you take away rights of half of our residents that they've had all along, their residents ready to line up to sue us over it. And so you stop making the bad decisions that create the environment where those things happen. In terms of the expenses, I think there's an ongoing process to do that. I don't have visibility into what those are. I've seen little windows of it that suggest that there, at least in the past, have some things. When several of us got together back in 2015 to try to bring some democracy and change to the board, and we collected petitions and added, I think we had 4 candidates we added that year to the ballot. The Homes Association sent out the first ballots the day before we got the petitions to them. So they said, well, we're not going to do another mailing. We'll do one for you, or you can do your own mailing with all the ballot envelopes. And if we do it for you, it's $18,000 is what we pay for. Well, we did it, and it cost $3,500. So, I don't think we're spending $18,000 in mailing now, but it's an example of things that they thought that it cost $18,000 in mailing, and it really didn't, and that you can do those kinds of things.
Thank you. Reed.
Yes, the best way to improve your finances, if we can improve revenues, our expenses, to really analyze those. One of the problems has been that the financial statements that we have, and I've tried to get this before with past board members, but it's not detailed. It's hard to really understand, get a good grip of these expenses. And for instance, I think there's salaries of over $300,000, but also the board gets a certain amount. How much, or the archery board. So how much does the archery get paid? We don't have a breakdown on that. And also like for different insurance costs and a breakdown of that, we really have to have better financials so that we can really dig into this. In past kind of work experience, I've been what's sometimes called as kind of a spreadsheet junkie, where you have to do discounted cash flows, analyze the expenses for businesses and for properties. Very used to doing this. And really with what I've seen with the financials, it limits what you can do. There's another board that I'm a member of, and I'm actually on the expense allocation committee with that. I've actually prepared budgets because we've had a financial crunch with revenues and expenses, and I'm helping navigate our board in this other property through this. So I have the experience to do the same thing with this board. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. You spoke, didn't you? Were first, right? Yes. Okay. If we want to end on time, we're going to have to quit doing questions now and start with the closing remarks. Each of you has 2 minutes, and we're starting with Charles and working our way down and finishing with Marlene. Okay? Yeah, keep the mic. Yeah.
Okay, anyway, thank you. It's been a real pleasure being here tonight and addressing the residents of PVE and possibly Mary Les, if there are any members of Mary Les here. So, in short, the business of the PVHA should be conducted with long-range strategic planning, and it should be in a transparent manner. So the policies should be developed and implemented in an open, fair, and collaborative manner. So by that I mean we should work together with all parties involved, including the city. So one of the things that I'd like to see in the future is that the PVHA work more closely with the city to implement some of these policies so they're consistent rather than overlapping or incongruous. I mentioned 3 goals. Unify the community to address the future problems. I mentioned how I'm going to do that. Provide more clarity in the CCRs. I think we can, as a PVHA, we can reduce conflict between neighbors by if we were to create and interpret the CCRs so that it's more clear to all members of the association. And thirdly, we just talked about financial health. I think it's important to achieve financial health. I've mentioned some of the ways to do it. So in short, my extensive experience in working with nonprofit organizations, government entities at all levels, as well as commercial entities, I think will allow me to help the association in achieving these goals. So thank you for coming tonight. If you would like to get additional information on me, please visit my website at voteforcharlestang.com, or I'll be out there passing out printouts of the website. Thank you.
you. All right, Reed.
Thank you for attending tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight on some of the very important issues with the PVHA. Most importantly, this may be one of the most important elections coming up in the history of the PVHA. The reason is there hasn't been a valid election in a decade because of this requirement established nearly a century ago, requiring that more than 50% of all owners in PV and Mirror Lest vote. We've discussed this issue, but what we haven't discussed is that if we don't use the 35% quorum, which we have an opportunity to use in this election, that next year that quorum goes up to 50%. And it's so tough to even get 35% this year that trying to do 50% in the future, it may be many years before we actually have another election that's really valid. I mean, so this is a critical year. We have to really get a quorum this year. So far, we've had 13, after 2 mailings, we've had 1,336 votes. A couple hundred of these, there's been a problem with people signing the ballots. We're trying to resolve that problem, but that's another issue. But still, we need several hundred more votes to be received before January 14th, 2020. We have a third mailing coming out. So please, if you haven't voted, or if you, with your friends, maybe when you have discussions, please encourage them to vote. We need enough people so that we can really have an election and make a difference so that we don't have this problem that we've had in the past with the board where we have had difficulties getting people off of the board, where they've made bad decisions, as we've discussed. So please vote, and if you haven't yet voted, please, I'd appreciate your vote. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you. John?
Yes, thank you very much for coming and for your attention. And I agree with Reed. This is a special election. We've never had the opportunity to affect that. We haven't really talked about the reason why the board can't change the quorum unilaterally, because it's in the bylaws, and it takes as hard as it to get to a 50% vote, it takes a 2/3 vote to change anything in the bylaws. I would actually love to see us take the bylaws and rewrite the whole bylaws and then do the hard work to get 2/3 of the people to approve it, because right now the bylaws are a little stale because they were written at the time when the PVHA did all the city roles, and when the city was created in 1940 and took on a lot of the streets and maintenance and those kinds of things and the governance roles, they're still left in the PVHA bylaws. So it would be nice to clean that up. I think it's really important theme here to defend the CCNRs, to work closely with the city. I think some of that's starting with new people like Michael on the city side, and Dick and Marlene on the Homes Association. They're starting to have the conversations. When we were having our settlement negotiations on the Parkland suit, I was absolutely astonished when the mayor of Palos Verdes Estates came into the room and the president of the Homes Association came in the room, and they introduced each other to each other because they hadn't met. We were not working very well together, and so we need to kind of work consistently. Encourage you all to become informed. In addition to listening tonight, the pvrrg.com website has written answers by all of us to a series of questions and other information. This video will be posted there as well. And then the ROBES website, the PVE Good Gov, has additional information there that might be helpful, including a discussion of many of the issues that we've talked about tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Dick?
Well, thank you all for coming, and thanks again to the League of Women Voters. I want to say that I've enjoyed the few months that I've been on the board. I am proud that I was able that I did vote no on the view resolution. I'm sorry that it passed, but I'm glad that it was a split vote, which I don't think is too much in the history of the PVHA. And this is an important election. And one thing to keep in mind as we talk about the PVHA and its problems and what it's done in the past is that if you went to the November 2018 PVHA board meeting, there were 4 members. One had been on the board over 20 years. One just resigned this summer after 18 years. I think another about 9 or 10, and the third about 5. If you come to the meeting in February, regardless of how this election turns out, the most person with seniority will be Marlene, if she's on, with 1 year. So it's going to be a new board, new people, and we'll see how it goes.
Thank you. Gain.
Yes, thank everyone for coming, and again, thank the League of Women Voters for coming, organizing it, and hosting it. And I'd like to say that I would like everyone's support for this. I think I could bring my energy, tenacity, and experience to the table as a director, one of the 5 directors of the PVHA. And would like to say that my 3 goals would be to really enforce the original 1923 CCNRs. I think there's a lot of good meat in there, and we really could go back to that and stop drifting away from what was originally great ideas. And when you bought your home here, that's what you thought you bought. So I don't think we should engage in bait and switch. I would also, my second goal would be fiscal responsibility, and my third goal is to protect property values. I think when we don't enforce the rules, we lose property values. So again, thank you for coming, and I would thank you for my support ahead of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Marlene.
Okay, I want to thank the League of Women Voters. You're doing a fabulous job here. It's been a pleasurable evening. And I want to thank the residents in the audience that came tonight, and also those that will be watching on the video later. So what I want to tell everyone is I want everybody to talk to 2 people and make sure that they vote. It's really important to return those ballots, no matter who you support or don't support. Let's get that in there. And of course, the Homes Association is supporting the 35% quorum change. So that's number 1 on the list. In addition to that, I think that no matter which way the elections go, I think we'll end up with a really good diversified board. And I think it's great that we have people with different kinds of skills to be able to contribute to the overall process. CCNRs are a priority. I guess what I bring to the table is information on the day-to-day workings of the Homes Association. Having been a submitting professional for 35 years, I've been on the other side of the counter. I've been on people's properties. I've shepherded homeowners through various processes. And I think it's the day-to-day stuff that all of you out there, are interested in. And then, of course, being in landscape, my other priority is to make sure that our parklands are protected. And I'd like to really get on track with the Olmsted thing and get that information out to the community so that everybody understands what a unique place we have here and our history and how wonderful it is to live in Palos Verdes. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. This concludes our candidate forum for directors of the PVHA. I want to, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, Palos Verdes Peninsula, I want to thank the City of PV Estates for letting us have this event here. And I want to thank all the candidates for coming, participating, all your good answers. I want to thank the audience for coming, and let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. This concludes our forum.